Okay, we're going to look into another article here on Gobekli Tepe and the correlation of a cometary impact that apparently hit the Earth at about 10,500 years ago and caused the Younger Dryas event. There's another correlation, and in that fact, spurred humanity to make a big change. And of course, it seems to have been allowed because we came out of the Ice Age and everything started to flourish after this point, of course. But there was a harsh time in between those two where we hit a secondary Ice Age, and it was so harsh and so sudden. It was like we came into spring and got all the way into March, April, May, and then it froze over again, like a very, very late freeze, something that seems odd. They can find this in the ice sheet test and things. And I remember when I was a kid and hearing about the first times of the Younger Dryas and so on, and I was already trying to figure out a lot of things, and I had figured out recently to this point that, or found out, that North America they had camels and things and stuff living here, and it had all gone away. And my brother and I had a diorama set that had some of the animals, saber-toothed tiger and all this, and each one had its own set, and then you put them together, and it made a whole caveman diorama type thing that was real neat with cave bears and all kinds of stuff. It was real popular back in the 70s, and a type of model thing that you would build. And there was other sets of them too, ones from horror movies and so on, and he did a full set of those with Frankenstein's lab and all kinds of stuff. And so there's a few different sets of those dioramas, but that idea, how we lost that so rapidly, got me to thinking a lot of things. And I was looking into archaeoastronomy at the time already and things, and I believe this is what I'm thinking of mentally is just after now. What I'm thinking of is just after seeing Chariots of the Gods and having already looked at Nazca lines and all this type of stuff, and people started going UFO crazy. And what I pinpointed on that point too was there was a great cataclysm that had happened, and everybody came out of it in a fog. And you can see some commonalities between all of these different people and some symbolism that shows up everywhere, almost like everybody knew something at one time, and then that had gotten lost, and then out of that came all these different civilizations slowly over time, and we don't get a record of it until about 3,000, 3,500 BC maybe. And but it seems like 10,500 to 3,500, we've got a lot of missing space here. And when I was a kid, we were taught we were UG, and I was already looking at this like, well, that doesn't show that to be. And talking to people, and I kind of realized that no, they're trying to force a biblical model of the world being started around 4,000 BC. And so that's hampering everything, and science is slowly getting us out of that. And I'm like, okay, all right, so how did all this come about and so on? Well, anyhow, not to divulge just way too much like I always do, but so I want you to think of something here. One of my thoughts of how this went down was that the Milky Way has an oscillation to it. I'll put my hand up here and give you an idea. But the Milky Way, if this horizontal line that we're looking at there has kind of let's say that's the ecliptic or the flat plane of the Milky Way, where it's kind of a flat record, and we come on and we start looking real flat at it. In fact, the water that's right down here in the bottom part, let's say that's actually it. That's hitting the ecliptic plane, if you will, okay? And so this spot that you see here would be the center, and where we supposedly have a black hole now and so on, right? And this plane of ecliptic, well, as we go, we actually oscillate from going down to up to through to up to down to through to up, and we oscillate like this, back and forth, as we're spinning around and around and around constantly. And I thought, it's kind of like, if you think of it as being static in that ocean right there, if you will, follow me, that as we go down, we start to get closer to sea level, you feel more pressure, there's a lot more steam, humidity, and then all of a sudden it seems like a mist, and you come down and you get submerged. Now in our model, after you go 100 feet down in the ocean, it comes back out in the mist again, goes out into choky area, into regular area, into less and less and thinner, of course, down at the bottom. So like, once we get down low like this, below the ecliptic, it would be just as thin as above the ecliptic. And what I'm saying here is that as we go down through this, you would find this to be a static situation, almost, where like, think of it on the terms of static, of hiss, that there would be very little interaction and very few things around you or interacting with you here, but as you slowly came down through it, you would have more interaction, and it would start clicking and hissing, if you would, if we took it on an idea of static. And once we got here, it would slowly go away again. And then we turn around and we pivot and we go right back up and we do it again, right? And we do it again, and we do it again. And each time we do this, running through this, we run through a lot of material, perhaps stuff that's left over, ancient, solar systems that have disintegrated long ago, suns disintegrated long ago, gone supernova, trash, things, who knows what. But I thought, as we run through that crap, either we run through that crap, or our asteroid belt that's out far beyond Pluto gets disturbed by it, and like a ping pong ball set up there, it'll hit a few things and it'll ping pong something, and whenever it does, it gets slung in towards our center of our solar system, and in doing so, there's your comets and your things to get dispersed loose. And so we either run through a bunch of problems, like going down a highway and running through a bunch of bugs, grasshoppers, if you've ever done something like that, or let's call it rain, whereas you're going down the highway and you slowly start to go into some rain, and then it gets real heavy and then it goes away, that type of thing. Well, as I did this investigation more and more, and through the years, not me, but the backs of giants here, looking at this information, it seems like we've found a cometary impact, and this Younger Dryas event goes along with this concept. And so I at first thought, yeah, well, that's that. And then I thought, well, maybe that's not that. Maybe it's caused by another reason, but it's the same effect, And then we found out about Comet Encke and how they described how it had been a huge, gigantic, multi-comet, if you will, and it going around the sun had exploded or disintegrated into pieces and then strung itself out, but due to its size and even the pieces sizes, became comets that are as big as Halley's Comet in fragmentary pieces, but spreading out, and then going around it again, kept exploding into pieces. Well, popcorn comes off of that, and so on, and now we, as we go through this oscillation I just spoke about, go through our own waste, if you will, as we oscillate up and down, and we run through this primordial waste of these comets, and we see it annually as a torrid meteor shower. There's one in the spring too, but it basically is when the sun is there, and you get the flip-flop of that during the torrid meteor shower towards the end of the year, and it's right around Halloween. And I've shown you a video where I correlate that to being the season of the dead and how they pulled it all together, and this actually goes back to a primordial thing that probably comes even from this time here, and something people had kept up with. And when I first came up with the idea, there was nothing for me to justify that the people knew the seasons to the point that they could have kept up when this happens, pretty much. But there was a few hints at it, like ancient cave paintings that showed Taurus, and it showed the Pleiades, and it showed things, and it just like bam, whenever you finally realize that, you're like, okay, so these people knew this. And then they had calendars of the sun, and you see where in a cave the shadow of the sun off a rock that's at the entrance is making a certain cast across the wall, and they're marking it with these black dots, and over here is far equinox, and over here's far equinox, and things like that. Like, wow, okay, so there's a declination. People are realizing, way back when, these type of effects. So maybe it is possible that they had connected it to all the way back then. Now, as I've gone, this is thoughts from 15 to 20 years ago. And now we've gotten more and more correlation to go with it. And it just, bam, it just pegs it out. And I've always been waiting for somebody to find something, the Sumerians, and finding their tablets and how it reaches back, and they tell you it's of ancient times, but then there's no real writing before that. Finding places like Kamyana Mohila that come all the way back to 22,000 BC, and of course Gobekli Tepe, we're first going to talk about here, shows that there was a lot. We weren't ugh, just, hey, before writing, the week before that we were ugh. No, in fact, we haven't been ugh for a long, long time. My prediction right now is in the 150, 180,000 year range, where you would find us becoming sentient, where you would no longer say, okay, those people finally un-ugh. And of course, around the world, it happened at different rates after that, and up into modern times and stuff. And there were primitives and different areas and so on. But regardless of that fact, I'm talking about modern man, or Caucasians coming out of the effect, and Cro-Magnon and everything. But this depiction that we see here shows a lot of impacts happening at one time. And it looks like in our record that this did happen coming across the North Continental ice shelf. So you could picture yourself maybe being in the high Pacific above Hawaii and watching these things come down from the northeast across, and they're about to go across America and strike all the way across America, and then a few of these make it into Iceland. But I think it happened as things fragment too. I don't think it probably happened just like this as being one thing, but as it fragmented out, it was far enough apart that maybe it took even days for each impact to happen. There might have been a huge middle part, or rippling, a shotgun effect where you get hit by a few, that static again where you get run into by a couple of things and then peppered, and then a couple of more things, and that's it. It even seems that we had something hit us a couple of thousand years after this, but that's not in this video, I guess, because this is the major impactive, and it seems to have caused a major impact. Now, when we started seeing movies like Armageddon and things like that, I mean, I was like, there it is. There's the idea, and we've got to stop this. This is the thing, and they just, turn it into a love show movie, and we don't think about it anymore. And most people, I'm guessing, just don't want to think about things that it seems like we don't have any control of. And then another part of this is this death cult. Well, everybody thinks Armageddon's coming one day. And so when we see the movie Armageddon, and it shows you something like that, and you go, well, here would be what would Armageddon actually be. And then we're just sitting there with our thumb up our butt. It makes no sense. And aliens from another place are going to come and find this place, and they're going to look back in front of these things, and then they'll find this digital copy of Armageddon, and they'll be like, well, this is what they were talking about in the other books and that Bible-y thing, so is this what they have? This seemed more modern and real close to when it all went away. What does it show there? And he goes, well, they were well aware of everything. And okay, well, what did they do? Well, they did nothing. Well, how foolish. Yep. And they'll mark it up under foolish. And I'm like, wow, and I don't want to sound like the guy that's standing around on a street corner with a stupid sign on him saying the world's coming to an end or anything like that. I'm telling you that we got a problem that's going to happen sometime or another, and we need to pay attention to it, very much so, and then try to put some things in place to where we can stop this. And we also need to investigate it a whole lot more. Put a couple of telescopes up that are just looking for things like this, any activity, anything, whatsoever. We have comets come through like that one in Russia. It looks like just one of these pieces came through and blew up in the atmosphere, kind of like a Chelyabinsk or one of the craters and stuff, and happened up in Kamchatka, but nobody really knew about it. You have that happen over like L.A. or someplace, and it's going to maybe wake people up, but it'll be a little too late for the people in L.A. and surrounding areas, and then our ecology for years after that, and so on. And if we catch it far enough out there, we could disintegrate it into smaller pieces or divert it like they're talking about. Truly, if one comes in huge like this and it's going to cause this amount of damage, if you blow it in a bunch of little bitty pieces, it doesn't do as much damage even whenever it does hit, and you turn a massive bullet into just a couple of pelts of a shotgun shell, most of it missing you, burning up in our atmosphere, doing whatever. Anyhow, I have worries about this, and it's not like a, oh my God, tomorrow, but then again, there's a tomorrow that's your children. There's a tomorrow that's their children. There's a tomorrow that's gonna come one day, and I'm wondering how many people are gonna be so caught up in what we're doing and not pay attention to the big picture. It kind of says in the Bible, whenever they're at Sinai, God's supposedly talking to Moses, and Moses apologizes for the people, and he says, "For they're a stiff-necked people, Lord." And I've used that before to show you that everything was talking about a zodiacal story, and that they can't get the idea, and it was a seasonal procession they were talking about at that moment, and using it and correlating in an odd way. And the stiff-neck thing is that the people aren't looking up at the stars, that they don't know. They're not paying attention. During the day, you can't see them at all, and that's when the people are out. But at nighttime, here's where the truth and mysteries and things are, and people need to know. And it's all sacred, and so on. And at first, we were looking at zodiacs that were straightforward, zodiacs that were in the procession, it seems. And so we're looking at, after the sun goes down, the people tabulating it, what's coming up, right? So you see Leo coming up, and so they call that the age of Leo. But then there's a shift that goes on too, where sun worshipers start changing the situation, and it's a hidden secret of God, the sun, that it's where it comes up, and it's the zodiac where it's coming up into. And so some of these times when we look at 28,000 years in some of this elder stuff I'm looking at, I'm thinking that's more like 16. That's more like, no, that's half of that. Yeah, it's half of 28,000 years. It's in that 14,000 year range, so it's a couple of thousand years before the cataclysm and coming out of it. Can't really get much other than that, than a few cave art paintings and stuff, and they're making a point of Taurus and this Taurid meteor shower that kind of every year is this little mimic, this little show of this big thing that happened. And it's almost like the fireworks show that used to happen for everybody, like a 4th of July, if you will, hint, hint. And they sit and watch and ooh and ah, and oh, did you see that one? Because you can see a lot of them. If you get out from a city where there's no lights and you sit and watch the meteor shower, you can see quite a bit. I remember being about 10 or 11 watching, and me and my brother counted like, I forget what it was 22, something like that. And we were out for a while, went back in, came back out in the back area, turned off the back porch lights. Yeah, he had a telescope, putting the maximum power onto it, straining real hard. You could actually barely make out Saturn's rings and so on, but man, you could zoom in on the moon. And yeah, so anyhow, let's look into this. I don't want to go all melancholy anymore on you, but I'll probably say more. Prehistory decoded at Gobekli Tepe from a cataclysmic event at dawn's the origin and perhaps the end of civilization. Around 13,000 years ago, or 10,500 BC or so, the Earth burned. A swarm of comet debris from the torrid meteor stream had blasted the Americas and parts of Europe. The worst day in prehistory since the end of the Ice Age. Many species of large animal were exterminated by the conflagration and ensuing cataclysms, and those that survived the initial onslaught would do little against the floods, acid rain, and starvation that followed. And one of the things that I noted out of that was that we lost all the major flora and fauna out of North America somehow, and the ice sheet seems to have warped extremely hard right whenever this seems to have happened, because when you look at it, it should be uniform. It should be like a beetle haircut coming down somebody's head, but yet it was way back on the back. He had this bad receding hairline. What caused that receding hairline? Well, smack, somebody knocked all the hair off the front, and this quick ice age knocked it off, killed all these Siberian mammoths. Some of them with still food in their mouths and food in their gut. There wasn't a oh no and they were running for it. It was kind of like that kids cartoon Ice Age type thing where bam, it all seems to happen at once. People suffered too. Mankind was knocked backwards by this cataclysm, even to more primitive Stone Age ways of life, leaving sickly, frightened communities battling for survival. Vegetation and the animals that grazed it could not live in the weak half-light of the day or the starless black of night. And without them, life was bleak and hard. And it seems like with this driest event, like I was saying, we'd come all the way into a spring, into almost summer, and then all of a sudden, wham, a big freeze again. And so you can imagine what that does to the plants whenever that happens just in an annual way here. But imagine what it did to all the creatures that had already spread back into the colder areas, and have it happen to them in a snap. That, man, 1 or 2 winters, and it's very much minimized what's left out of it. Think of it as being a giant blizzard coming through Texas. No, it's much worse than that. It was much worse than that. Many years passed before the dust settled and the stars could even be seen again. The sun and moon gradually strengthened, and slowly the natural order of things returned. But this devastating cataclysmic event was not forgotten. The cataclysmic birth of religion. In the Fertile Crescent, modern-day southern Turkey, the surviving Natufian tribes memorialized this great catastrophe by erecting Gobekli Tepe, the world's first temple. The event that we know of at this point. The event had changed them, had made them more fearful and more religious, finding a cosmic connection to God, and that maybe God was mad about what they did. Maybe they needed to start doing a worship and finding out more about this. The priests were actually originally astronomers and shamans, right? They prayed at the new temple, or the new stone temple, for protection, deliverance, and anything else that might help, and they watched the sky very careful for stone temple pilots. Now, their community swelled and their temple grew. Needs were met, and they further developed agriculture to support the growing number of sedentary mouths that camped within sight of their monument. And I'm thinking that a lot of them weren't just camped right there. They would find more evidence of it because they've done plugs and cores around in places. I think that people were migratory back then, migratory with animals, migratory with the seasons, and that this was a seasonal thing that people would come and do. And perhaps it was the starting of agriculture because they knocked the time of year and told you when this was going to happen. Hey, here's the rites of spring, go. That type of thing to a lot of people. And there would be people sent out from here to let the others know. And this is where you get the idea of perhaps even angels, but the idea of people coming down and telling you what's going on, and reflected maybe even concepts of prophets and so on, and from the Bible and things like that, but in that same shamanistic type of way, and people letting them know, and priests and of course priestly classes in other areas, and then they spoke among themselves. It was kind of a secretive type thing. Here we look at Gobekli Tepe itself, and you can see each one of these rings. There's a lot of conjecture about this, and these aren't at the same time, and it looks like that they had one lined up, and then as it became out of line due to precession, they built another one, and they built another one, and they built another one, and so on. And some of these have a lot of symbolism on them, and other ones don't as much. And they've only uncovered what I think is probably about 1/4 to 1/3 of it. There are people that say they've uncovered 6 out of about 50 probably off of it. I'm thinking that a lot of this is not going to show up to be these rings. Other portions of this are going to show other things, and realize that this is actually a civilization that's going on here for this type of thing, right? They may be fed by local hunter-gatherers coming in and feeding them. They don't have to go hunt. They're doing the special for everybody, and we're hunting to help to do to you. This is the first tithing, right? Tithing quite often was giving of foods that were going to go to the gods or whatever off of it if, they were going to, anyhow. So it spread like a contagion. The potent mix of religion and agriculture propelled this new lifestyle outwards into the Eurasian and African continents, around the Mediterranean and way off into Siberia, down and through into India and so on. But, there's already some Denisovans going on, a lot of things happening. Let's not go totally into there, though. The greatest revolution in history was underway. It was a beginning. But nothing lasts forever in this world. In time, new cultural centers arose that outcompeted Gobekli Tepe in their own regions. People had their own thing going on. New fashions took hold in each capital, promulgated by those with much gain. And Gobekli Tepe's star slowly faded away, but it was still recorded. You can find the idea and the concept still in the Bible, telling you that this is between the Tigris and Euphrates, and where did it all kind of come from. And Gobekli Tepe's in between there. So is Sumeria. Sumeria talks about up north and the lords of Arata and so on, and that pretty much predate them and who they were, talking about them in a sanctified way. And that probably has a lot to do with this culture, or the cultures that came out of this. It's not the Akkadians that end up out there shortly after or during the latter time that we know about, and in Babylon and all those things. No, it's from before that. 3,000 years after it was founded, Gobekli Tepe was purposefully buried to protect its heritage. The messages written on its walls effectively witness accounts of darkest catastrophe in 20,000 years. They were hidden from waves of marauding invaders, scheming looters, and many others that just walked right over the top of it. In fact, it's called the Little Pregnant Hill, and these local guys would graze their goats around onto it till somebody found this slabby piece, and they realized it was the top of one of those T's. Told a couple of archaeologists, and Schmidt came out and said, hey. So until that is, they were rediscovered by Klaus Schmidt in 1994. 20 years after that, Paul Burley and Graham Hancock found the key to unlock these messages. They were read properly again for the first time in 10,000 years by me 2 years ago, hardly believing that I had stumbled upon. I wrote a peer-reviewed paper with my colleague Demetrios Tsikris that hit headlines across the world, and I've read that myself, and a lot of it looked like conjecture, and as we go into it, it looks like, hey, maybe it's a little more right on than we had thought before. Our Fox paper showed the animal symbols at Gobekli Tepe, apart from snakes, represented constellations, and the same constellations we know in the West today. And I've shown that in a few earlier videos, where you can see the scorpion and these things, and the ancient bird that used to be. And that also is still in, if you look at the ancient Sumerians, it's real close to that. So you can see changing over time of maybe what they figured the dots look like. Hey, I see this in the clouds, what do you see? and you can make different things out of these dots, but it also shows a continuity. It's always Aquarius, it's always Capricorn, it's always, and that shows you a connection. It's always Leo. Why isn't it a dog? Why isn't it a cat? If Egypt was so into cats, why didn't they? Well, no, it's always Leo, right? It's always. So why is it always? Well, because it always was. The snakes emanating or threatening these animal symbols therefore represented meteors from the Taurid meteor stream. One pillar in particular, pillar 43 it's called, is especially important as it shows their writing to be decoded using statistical methods. It is our Rosetta Stone, and the message written on it on that pillar is profound. It is very likely that it encodes the date of the Younger Dryas event itself, written in terms of precession of the equinoxes. And people have taken, and in one of these videos, it's neat, they've shown how you spin back in time when the equinoxes are coming up, and they go, okay, well, here it is around about 10,500 BC, and they spin it, and here it goes, and there lines up Scorpio and the bird and so on, and it shows the bird holding the sun out there, and that's when the sun's rising right there where that would be. Now people have said, oh, he's holding a comet. Well, I don't think he's holding the comet. That's the sun's precession right there. But down in the bottom corner there's a headless person, and what's odd and a lot of people don't get is at the very top there's actually 3 of those handbags everybody holds. It's in everybody's, and that people freak out on, the little handbag where they're holding that and they have their hand up and they're doing the tree of life situation that goes way back into so many civilizations with different situations attached to it. This pillar reveals many new insights that overthrow commonly accepted norms of scholarship. It's revolutionary. Most importantly, it tells us that the ancient people were far more sophisticated astronomers than people previously thought, and they sure as hell weren't UGG. And it also confirms that Klube and Napier's coherent catastrophism, a theory that proposes multiple devastating comet impacts on Earth over the last 20,000 years or so, with perhaps more to come, is correct. Essentially, it tells us beware, for the cosmos is not as safe as once thought, and all these craters you see on the moon and all these planets could all happen again and still happen. Sure, most of it got all sopped up, but all you got to do is bump something from the outer solar system. It doesn't even have to come from anywhere else. It could come from what we already have, and you just, a butterfly bats his wings, and here we go. If you look, here's those 3 handbags, right? And in the picture show this is an elephant. It's up here too. So were elephants all the way up here at that time? Well, this whole tundra's place, yeah, and mammoths and things, of course, just shortly before this, of course. But so here's your buzzard depictions and stuff, and of course that goes back, like I was telling you about this bird worship, where it really wasn't a bird worship, but it was looked at as whenever somebody died and you cremated them back before they started cremating, they would put them up on a dais and let the birds eat them and take them up to the heavens. And you can see that. And so this raven of death here, or this buzzard, this vulture, is very symbolic, and it has to do with the death. And you could say that at this point we're starting to develop a death cult, because we're all built around these things, and then when this happens, that's what's in the procession. But also there's Scorpio here, the other bird effigy that's here, and here's the man with his head cut off and his arm sticking out. And so is this a sign of even perhaps they were doing some type of sacrifices there and so on? There's been a lot of conjecture out of it, but clearly this is not the story that we tell our children, though, or that we are even told as children. Most academics across the earth sciences still hold to the uniformitarian paradigm developed over 200 years ago by James Hutton, which reassures us that the earth is safe from these kinds of devastating impacts. While the dinosaur-killing asteroid story has been brought by most, uniformitarianism maintains that such events could not have happened over the time span of humans being on the planet, and these events are supposedly about as rare as fairies, and it's just never going to happen again. And yet we saw the comet come in, Shoemaker-Levy, and disintegrate into pieces and hit. And whenever it did, each spot that it made on the planet was literally big as the Earth, if not larger. And so not even the comet, but a fragmentary of a decent sized comet would just wipe the hell out. And we'd be lucky to regerminate from it. Seems like plants and everything would. Some animals might make it, and it would just reset everything. Would we make it through it? If it happened now, 1,000 years from now, would anybody have the technology to even talk to each other like I'm doing to you right now? Or would we start all over again? Would there start being this time before time people talked about before, hey, and back in the time before time, like whenever you see in Mad Max when the kids that were trapped there and they just knew these weird things, would it come from that? Staying safe from cataclysmic events. But we know this view of the events is wrong. It's delusional. Uniformitarianism is dead and should be buried. In any case, every scientist should automatically be suspicious of it. In technical terms, uniformitarianism is an extreme form of extrapolation. It proposes that only the geological processes we have witnessed over the last few hundred years, corresponding to scientific revolution, can have ever happened on Earth or will happen anymore, right? Although we know about giant volcanoes and things that have all gone off, and if it happened again, it would definitely cause something. What if Yellowstone was to have its giant caldera explode, like people have talked about? What if there was another Krakatoa event? We have found that these affected us during our lifetimes extremely, made us go through little micro winters, all kinds of things that we didn't know because it was happening on the other side of the planet at the time. And now we've geologically been able to find out, wow, this thing blew up back here whenever, oh wow, during the Dark Ages. Anyhow, so they say what's ever happened on Earth within the last few million years. It effectively ignores rare events, in particular those originating from space. But as any decent scientist knows, rare events are often dominate complex systems like Earth's environment. So crap happens, and if you just look at the moon, you can tell, oh, crap's happened. And in general, extrapolations are normally avoided altogether in science or used with only great caution. So why has uniformitarianism been so popular? Well, I'm not sure the answer of this. Possibly there's a psychological dimension to it, where we want to feel complacent and say, oh, it'll never happen, and then you sit around in a doomsday cult of Christianity and things, just saying Armageddon's going to happen, and when it does, you'll be like, well, there it is. Instead of mankind prospering, for some reason, I don't get the gist in that concept. Perhaps speaking in general, we would rather not confront the dangers that face us, especially if there is little we can do about them. Nevertheless, from a scientific perspective, uniformitarianism is wholly unsatisfactory and needs to be banned. How can I be so confident of this? Well, how can I state with such assurance that most of academia's got it wrong, while I and at least 70 other scientists, including Comet Research Group, are right? Well, apart from the lunacy of uniformitarianism, there are three major lines of physical evidence of the cataclysm to draw on, each of which is ironclad and revolutionary in its own right. But combined, they all point in the same direction to provide an unassailable paradigm-changing case. Briefly, there is the geochemical, astronomical, and archaeological evidence. Beginning with geochemistry, it's now known that a disaster of cosmic dimensions struck Earth nearly 13,000 years ago. Nanodiamonds, microscopic iridium-enriched magnetic grains, and elevated levels of platinum, all of which are strong indicators of a comet impact, have been found at the base of the Younger Dryas boundary, or what they call a black mat, a ubiquitous layer of discolored sediment dating to the onset of the Younger Dryas or the Mini Ice Age. Their presence spanning at least 3 continents. It has been confirmed by multiple independent research groups within the last 10 years. Moreover, a frozen layer of platinum dust occurs in the Greenland ice sheet, at precisely the same time horizon. Attempts to refute this evidence are badly flawed in a fundamental and surprising basic way. And when we look, here's one of the pictures that show you this, and it's not even difficult to find. You don't have to even walk up. Whenever you find a place that's actually been cleaved off enough to where you can see it here, you don't have to have like, well, show me where you're talking about. I think anybody looking at this picture can easily tell that this actually slabified this sedimentary rock here, and that black line that you see there is the line that we're talking about, of this black mat. Covers a huge area. Next, there's the astronomical evidence, observations of comets beyond Jupiter, so trans-Neptunian objects and so on, the frequency of which they enter the inner solar system and their fragmentation within the inner solar system all suggest that the intense comet impacts on Earth with global consequences are expected on the time scale of human development. And people have looked at this and they go, yeah, it kicks in asteroids all the time, but hey, we're a little dot going around and around. So even though every once in a while there's a giant ceiling fan in the middle called the sun that whips things off of it if they get too close, and or sucks them in, and it'll splatter things out and the crap hits the fan. If you're not where the crap slings, then it doesn't hit you. And you're like, well, what if we run right into the crap band that's actually existing there? We do it every year, but we don't run into the thick part of it, luckily, because, you know, hey, when are you going to hit that little bitty thin, when are you going to hit that spot? When does it all add up? And is this something that happens in a cyclical nature, like I was talking about at the very first, where we pulse up and down through something? Does this correspond with these ice ages that almost look like a heartbeat? And people are talking about global warming, and it goes, yeah, but if you look, we're due another heartbeat. Somewhere between 1,500 and 4,000 years from now, we're about to take another dive, as long as something else doesn't affect it and all of a sudden change the pulse that was going on before. And we're going to go through another ice age. And then all this is going to change again. And everybody's going to pull down towards the center of the planet and so on. It's going to change everything. Here's 22 sites that they've looked at, which actually clarifies the Younger Dryas boundary field. And here's the Iceland crater up here at 16 that they just recently found. And there's another one now, so this would be 23. There's another one here that they have just found. I did a video on it, when was it, like November of last year. There's been more come out and some better footage and a few better graphics on it too. I probably ought to make a better one, because the one I did was just kind of like a, aha, check it out, you know. I always want to kind of show things like that. It's almost like, you know, there are professors that are probably gone now that I'd really like to come and just knock on the door and walk in and then take off my glasses, and they'd be like, oh man, it's you. Yeah, and I'll be like, yeah, uh-huh. How about that Younger Dryas event? How about that Cometary impact? Let's have, hey, you got time for lunch? So, moreover, observations of cometary fragments accompany Inky in the Taurid meteor stream, and I think that they named that correctly, and having to do with the Sumerians and so on, and Inky. It's amazing that they named it, and it goes along with it. To me, it's strangely correlating how all of these things keep showing up, and knowledge that I show you a lot of times showing up in movies and things and stuff, and little snippets that people don't put together. It's kind of amazing. Along with these massive zodiacal dust clouds. So we go through that Taurid meteor storm twice a year, actually. Once on the way in, once on the way out. So one's facing the sun, one's not. These strongly suggest that they should also have occurred in even shorter time scale of human civilization. Indeed, it would be a major surprise if none were found. Therefore, an event on the scale of the Younger Dryas impact of 13,000 years ago is entirely expected. In fact, it should have happened again, perhaps, and then here we go, fixing to run through that static again. And I remember when I was a kid, talking about that static, I went off subject whenever I was talking about it first, that eventually we would go through that static again. And whenever I was a kid, they were saying, well, it's going to happen in, 20, 2014, somewhere around in that range. They haven't pinpointed it yet, and that we were coming through the static already. And I was like, oh hell! And nobody's paying attention to this. And here's that Armageddon movie, and there, and it could hit us at any moment. But nobody was seeing anything, of course. But we've seen enough closer impacts and stuff. There's one over the ocean not too long ago. There was one over Iceland that actually set off all of our nuclear set off things, our detection devices. There's a picture right here looking at a comet.